But what's also interesting is that it's not like Voltaire wants us to conclude that it's the worst possible worlds, right? So on the one hand, Candide is silly in thinking this is the best possible world, coming up almost predictably with the self-same conclusion, no matter what happens. So this is, I think, clearly seen as negative, and it's in part, I think, a critique of a certain kind of philosophy, right? It's one of the resources of comedy to aim at philosophy. In a sense, if you look at the history of comedy, it sometimes strikes me that there's nothing funnier than a philosopher. Comedy was invented by Aristophanes, a Greek comic dramatist. What does his most famous comedy do? It's called The Cloud, and it drags Socrates, the famous Athenian philosopher, onto the stage and makes him an object of ridicule.
From Cloud Cuckoo Land.
Exactly. Even though here too, you can actually read that comedy as a serious grappling with philosophy and with the kind of philosophy Socrates represents. So on the one hand, some of the shots are cheap shots, but it's nevertheless a serious engagement with philosophy. And I think something similar happens in Candide, where it's the resources of a dramatist or here of a narrative writer to show philosopher in absurd situations and completely unresponsive to terrible things that happen and being fixed on a kind of theory that never changes. That's a great resource of comedy. At the same time, it's a serious grappling with the world.
Having in mind that Voltaire starts out thinking he's going to make his name in literature and that aspect of his work as an epic poet.
Right.
He writes the Henriade in the 1720s, praising Henry IV of France as an enlightened monarch, promoting freedom of religion. And it goes through a lot of editions.
Right.
In his lifetime, it's very popular, but it really is not something that's lasted.
And tragedy.
And he writes over 24 dramas, mostly tragedies, I guess, maybe entirely tragedies, so serious tragic drama. And again, I think he would have been astonished that this lighthearted farce is the thing for which he's now known worldwide. No one is reading it. I've never seen a staging, maybe you have, of any of his tragedies.
I have not.
Rarely played. And yet these resources of a dramatist are very much there. So one of the big benefits, I think, of Candide compared to the older poem on the Lisbon earthquake, the poem is monologic.
Yeah.
If we take the Russian formalist Bakhtin, it's just one voice. It's, in fact, an authoritarian voice complaining against this philosophy. Whereas Candide is dialogic.
Yeah.
Full of dialogue, full of perspectives, perspectivistic. And so not only do you have built around initially the sort of comedy of the philosopher who can't deal with reality, but you get, as the book goes on, a bunch of sort of models of practical philosophy, particularly people who are sort of on the outside of the power structure.
Yeah.
And so this goes along with Voltaire's political critique, that often the ones in authority are the last to know reality.
Yeah.
So then it is Cacambo, the mestizo in Brazil, and it's especially the women. It is Cunegonda, and then the old woman we meet in the 11th chapter. Very philosophical. They're a practical philosophy. And so then the question would be, what are the benefits of a practical philosophy versus the abstract, impractical philosophy of a Leibniz or a Dr. Pangloss, who would be the comic philosopher figure?
Following this thought, it seems to me maybe what was wrong about Pangloss is that he's sort of an authority teacher, right? He's a teacher of Candide. As an authority, plops this philosophy onto his pupil, who takes it and runs with it and never modifies it. It never changes, no matter what happens. That's a bad model of philosophy.
Pangloss himself says, you know, it's really too bad we're all disfigured now by syphilis, but that's why we have chocolate. That's the real cause of this, is to give us chocolate. Yes, we have to suffer all these diseases that come from the New World, but we have chocolate.
Whereas practical philosophy, as you call it, I think appropriately, is one that is born out of life experience, that is developed in response to different situations, and nevertheless allows these characters to carry on somehow, even under the most difficult circumstances.
Yes, I think very much one of the most moving affirmative philosophical moments in the book is when the old woman, going through all the things she's been through, she's the daughter of a pope, but she's been repeatedly raped, she's suffered disease, poverty, all these horrible things. And she says, and yet I loved life. I had this foolish attachment to this thing called life. And she does, and she has a kind of now philosophic awareness, distance, and she carries on. And above all, Cunegonda is certainly the prime figure for this. She's a survivor. Now she has to give up certain things, and she even has to accept certain, we would say, moral compromises. In a strict kind of Catholic doctrine, she is committing many of the sins in the book. She is certainly sleeping around. She is even willing to steal. She'll do what she needs to do. But she also has a sense of agency and control. even when she's being traded back and forth between the Portuguese Grand Inquisitor and a Jewish moneylender, Don Issachar, it's my Inquisitor and my Jew that she has. She is sort of making a world for herself.
Agency within the extreme limits that are placed on her agency, right? Because these characters are tossed about by forces that are much larger than them, and yet they somehow find their way.
That's right. There's, to me, a wonderful moment after she's been separated from Candide for a long time, thinks he's dead, discovers him again. They're in the New World. She hears his story, not unlike Odysseus' return at the end when he and Penelope talk, but now we don't hear too much what Penelope thinks after they've talked.
Right.
And now she gets to sort of sum it up rather than Candide says, oh, you've been through all this stuff. It's really been terrible. I'm so glad to see you again. And you must be really hungry. And I've got a real appetite. Let's go have some dinner. And it's really wonderful in French. J'ai grand appétit, she says. Precisely what Voltaire had written back to Frederick the Great. Now she gets to sum up the story. It's like, we lived through it, now let's go have dinner together.